Didn't realise that this doesn't, my camera's still in timed mode for selfies, so there might be some speech at the beginning of what I was recording last that is missing. But anyway, so this is, I guess this is the start of the trip. Halifax, here we come. This is going to look so terrible. This is going to be like, it's going to be immediately obvious which bits are on the phone. This is going to, the editing wise, this is going to look like a complete nightmare. It's going to be terrible. It's 20 past-ish, whatever. And I'm about to head out to travel down to Halifax for my gig at Spoken Queered tonight, which is an event that Genevieve Walsh runs in Halifax, which is an LGBT spoken word night. I'm going to be doing, for the first time, really, anywhere, the first performance of my show Struggle Play in anything like its completed form, so that it will be interesting to test, to see how that goes over with an audience. It's a slightly cut down version of the show. There is a section that's been expunged, and there have been a few other things that I've just cut for time reasons, so the full version of the show will be longer than that. Although one of the interesting things about that is that I kind of really like the cut down version of the show. And I kind of think cutting a lot of the stuff out that I've cut does make it stronger, but there are things that I do still want to cover in the show which are in the longer version. So the challenge, I think, coming back from this is going to be putting the stuff back in a way that doesn't look as if it's been sort of jammed back in there, trying to keep it having that sort of quality of flow, even though I'm jamming earlier bits back in. So it's probably going to need a few more rewrites after this, which in a sense makes this, I suppose, a unique performance of the show, which I'm quite excited about. Also, it's my first gig back for a while, so that's good. Quite excited about that, quite nervous, obviously, as well. There is, there's a lot of travelling involved, which is further than I've been for a while, but it is a Sunday, so hopefully travelling won't be too bad, and I'm not coming back during peak times tomorrow. What else did I want to say? The other challenge I'm sort of setting for myself with this is I want to film the gig, and I am sort of recording this for a travelogue piece. This is probably going to be the first time I deliberately set out to do something where I'm filming partly on my phone and partly on the DSLR that I'll be taking with me. If I sort of flip this around, it won't let me flip this around. Okay, hang on. So this is going to be a backpack gig. Basically, this is the backpack I'll be taking with me, and that has the DSLR in it. It has a tripod in there that I'm going to be using to film the gig itself, and I'm going to try and get some shots of Halifax. This actually reminds me of something which I very, very nearly forgot, and that is I think it's issue 2. Let me just have a quick check. So yeah, Strange Attractor issue 2. This is a kind of weirdness anthology that used to be published out of London by a few of the people who were associated with 14 Times and a few of the sort of culture type people who were around at the time. I'm going to sort of point the camera away for a second, or possibly not, but the reason that I wanted to ignore the washing up that still has to be done, by the way. I'm just looking through this. There is yes, Haunts of the Halifax Slasher, page 73 by Tim Chapman, a gentlemanly tour of the city's dark past. So I was going to read that on my way down in that. So that's what I'm going to be taking with me, with the phallic mushroom on the cover there. Okay, so I am here at the platform 9 Central Station, waiting to get this very train, which is going to take me to Halifax via Leeds Station. The train leaves at 2:03, and it's about 53 minutes past 1 now, so just about to get on, and next stop, not actually Halifax, but Leeds.
There is a proverb and prayer withal, that we may not to 3 strange places fall, from Hull, from Halifax, from hell, 'tis thus, from all these 3, good Lord, deliver us. This praying proverb's meaning to set down, man do not wish deliverance from this town. This town's named Kingston, Hull's the famous river, and from Hull's dangers I say, Lord, deliver. At Halifax the law so sharp doth deal, that whoso more than 13 pence doth steal, they have a time that wondrous, quick and well, send thieves all headless into heaven or hell. From hell each man says, Lord, deliver me, because from hell can no redemption be. Men may escape from Hull and Halifax, but sure in hell there is a heavier tax. Let each one for themselves in this agree, and pray from hell, good Lord, deliver me.
There you go, using an escalator to do a panning shot in the manner of Patrick Kaler's London. I just need to find platform 6C. So this is the Peace Hall, which is peace as in P-I-E-C-E, which is the last surviving building of its kind. It used to be where all the textile merchants would sell stuff, and now it's mainly used for sort of retail and art and public events. Apparently it's where Halifax Pride is going to be happening this year, so that's good. And it's amazing. This is just these kind of long panopticon-like terraces. Very utilitarian, very sort of Bentham and Mill. A little bit intimidating as well, actually, in a funny way. The piece here is a piece called The Blanket, which is by a sculptor from Newcastle. And there are stepped
steps with little waterfalls on them around there, which obviously very popular with the kids. I don't know if you can actually hear any of this, but yeah. If not, I'll just donate with the voice over later. Off and on, since... Sorry, I'm just getting the dead sheep. Sort of since, I would say... Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah, it takes a bit of time, yeah. But the show is pretty easy to carry. Like a nippy chair, so.
We mark out space for violence and ritual. Tatame, the fourth magic circle, the four corners of a ring. In bleachers and ballrooms, from skybox and suicide seats we spectate, separate from those we designate to suffer. Fists taped, oil anointed, hurling salt, half clothed as if for sacrifice. How long has this been going on? The model, actress, call her what you like, reads from a minatory script before the slats begin to be exchanged. Always, it seems, we've sat and watched the suffering of others, found redemption in the spit and spite we see, and blood, yes, sometimes blood. Should we apologise for that? Rush off and seek communion? Gaze on that man, half naked, beautiful, who suffers. We mark out space for ritual and violence. Tatame, the four corners of a ring, and altars Reredos, the stations of the cross. So, this is a cut-down version of the show I've been working on for the past year and a half. It is a show which is about trans bodies, cis bodies, and what happens in the space between them. It's also a show about female violence, from the titillating kind that men imagine to the darker forms of violence of which women are capable. That's your content note. So, the bit that I've mainly cut out of this is a section that is on my YouTube channel, which is a part of the show which is essentially a lecture that I give about a Turkish-American sports and true crime photographer called Theo Arendt, who was responsible in the 1970s as a favour to his friend, the publisher Stan Weston, who he was shooting true crime photos for, basically boosted the subscriptions of Weston's then failing wrestling magazines by introducing an even faker form of wrestling, which is pretty good for the for the time. Basically, he decided that red-blooded heterosexual American males would rather look at pictures of women pretending to wrestle each other, still tableau of women in their pants, pretending to put arm locks on each other, rather than watching big hulking blokes pretending to put arm locks on each other, which, given that the circulation of Weston's magazines improved, suggests that that worked. Obviously, anything which is aimed at cisgender, red-blooded, cisgender, heterosexual males will also make itself available for use by people who are not cisgender, not heterosexual, not male, and occasionally prone to bouts of iron deficiency anemia. But the main reason for the Eric section of the show is so that I can front-load the show with some of the main theoretical underpinnings of the piece, which are a series of Roland Barthes quotes from his essay on wrestling. So because I don't have time to do the entire lecture in this show, I'm just going to basically run through the quotes at fairly breakneck pace so that you have the theoretical underpinning for the rest of the show. So,
4 or 5 Roland Barthes quotes on wrestling done very, very quickly. 1. Wrestling is not a sport but a spectacle in which it is in the body of the wrestler that we find the first key to the contest. For Barthes, the physique of the wrestlers constitutes a basic sign, which like a seed contains the whole fight, in rather the same way that what Barthes called a punctum was the moment in time and space which in a photo most fully captures all the aspects, all the drama of the photographed scene. In wrestling, this is a drama of suffering. The function of the wrestler is not to win. It is to go exactly through the motions which are expected of him. Wrestling offers excessive gestures, exploited to the limit of their meaning. In wrestling, a performer who is down is exaggeratively so, and completely fills the eyes of the spectators with the intolerable spectacle of their powerlessness. Wrestling represents suffering with all the amplification of tragic masks. The wrestler who suffers in a hold which is repeatedly cruel offers an excessive portrayal of suffering, like a primitive Pieta, exhibiting for all to see their face, exaggeratedly contorted by an intolerable affliction which enacts the exact gestures of the most ancient purifications. Right. So, that's the theory. That's the homework. So, I feel the same nerves on a mat that I feel at my therapist's door. She asked me to tell her my earliest memory. On my back, on the speckled concrete of the schoolyard. I don't know how many girls surround me. What I do know? The bared teeth of their faces, the sharp toes of their shoes. Anyone who tells you that your school days are the happiest days of your life is straight. Or cisgender, or neurotypical. I'm using straight in the most generic sense here. If spending your time in a closed environment, stripped of your individuality and forced to jostle for your existence in a complicated, merciless dominance hierarchy is supposed to be such fun, why is it considered a punishment when adults have to do it? For most of us, a school is a form of prison, where we'll be condemned to do time for at least the first 15 years of our time on the planet. No wonder we're all so fucked up. Some people say trans women don't count as real women because we were socialized as boys. I wasn't. I wasn't socialized as a boy. I was socialized as something which failed at being boy, but didn't get to call itself girl either. This put me by default at the bottom of the playground pecking order. And throughout most of my school years, I was bullied not just by boys, but by girls as well. Girls, in fact, seemed to take a particular delight in picking on me. The pleasure of the kicked in kicking downwards, I suppose. My earliest memory of school is of being surrounded by a gang of girls who shoved me to the floor of the playground and took turns kicking me hard while I was down. This pretty much set the tone for my whole school career. I didn't learn at school that I was a boy and was entitled to it all. I learned instead to crawl, to look forward to nothing at all. I learned that I was something less than girl. And I learned to love the girls who hurt me.
Sorry, I thought you did.
She's that girl in every film you've seen. Hair tied up, burning eyes cast down, books held to her chest. Looking geeky, serene, the skin above her glasses wrinkling into a frown as she sucks nothing with a pencil. Tussles only with a page. Biting down to keep her lips still, so no secrets can escape, so none of you can see the passion she masks with her chest club face, because she's cowed by your derision, scared of being a disgrace. So it's only when the homework's done that she can go upstairs, apparently all innocence, and casually open up the book in which she dares to dream up and put down in words the things she wants to do. That in fact she wants to be the girl who bites off more than she can chew. That in fact she wants to be the girl girls like you like to do. And while you laugh and check her out, it's her who's checking you. Imagining how hard you twist your fingers in her hair, or strangle her right into bliss as she gasps not for air but from the pure endorphin rush that courses through her soul at the thought that you might crush her till her lungs and limbs go cold and she, no longer strong enough to scratch, submits to doing what she's told and surrenders to the fluttering touch that turns her world to gold. In the locked book, hidden in her room, she lets desire breathe for an hour at most, but far too soon her heart must be made safe. Her body cleaned and given rest, her hair once more tied back, books once more gathered to her chest, her lunch and pencils packed for another day of hiding in her intellectual shell. Bad girls may name desire in writing, true, but good girls never tell. So it occurred to me, partway through writing this, that there is actually a sense in which wrestlers and trans people are kind of similar, not just in the fact that both take hormones which make some bits of their bodies bigger and some bits smaller, but also because of the fact that as a trans person you're keenly aware of that Barthian truth that your body is telling a story, that you're trying to use your body to tell a story, and that other people are trying to recruit that body for their own stories, for the stories they want to tell. So here's a story about my body. In October 2017, I sat on a bench in Red Lion Square, London, which bore a brass plate engraved in memory of all the women and girls killed because of male violence, and phoned to confirm an appointment the next day with a session wrestler from the London Submission Room in Seven Sisters, which I did entirely for research for this show, honestly. How's that for a Barthian pumpkin? I was sitting in Red Lion Square because I'd been asked to read a poem for a London Sunday Assembly event at Conway Hall about gender identity. And the plaque on the bench seemed kind of like a bad joke to me, not because later that week I was going to pay another woman to choke me out repeatedly, but because I was worried about being non-consensually attacked at the gig by exactly the sort of women who throw around phrases like male violence without any sense of nuance. See, the thing about male violence is it's kind of a shibboleth. The term is popular with a certain type of self-styled feminist for whom it's almost tautological. To these people, violence always wears a male face, and the only victims of male violence worth mourning are cisgender women and girls. It should come as no great surprise that these people don't consider the violent deaths of trans women cause to mourn. Quite the opposite. Here's something one such woman, Bev Von Dore, had to say about the death of trans women. They expect we'll be shocked to see statistics about them being killed, and don't realise some of us wish they would all be dead. And the reason I was worried about this in Conway Hall was that Julie Bindel, who's kind of a big deal in that community, was launching her book the same week, not the same day thankfully, but the same week that I was doing this gig. And because Julie Bindel tends to attract a lot of critics, she also tends to attract a lot of very intense defenders, some of whom were going on Facebook and on the internet in the weeks leading up to this book launch, announcing their intention to turn up to the gig to deal with any critics carrying knives.
Oh.
So yeah, I was a little bit worried that Conway Hall was on their radar, and you know, I didn't want to be stabbed for performing a poem, if that's all the same to anyone. Now, it wasn't the same day, but it was definitely on their radar, and the possibility of being attacked by a knife-wielding bigot for reading a poem preyed on my mind. In theory, I could protect myself. I've trained knife defences before, but when it comes to knives, there is a big gap between theory and practice. In real life, no one will stab you overarm like Norman Bates in Psycho, but we train the move with knives and bottles, plastic over steel or glass. You move in, Meet the wrist before it's straight, step forward like a hieroglyph, and force it back and down. This will not break bone, but wrenches tendons, leaves the body prone for kicks or stomps or what you will. I know, because I had it done to me by a woman I was crushing on in my jiu-jitsu class. She didn't mean to hurt me, not exactly, but the counter to this move is doing it first, which is what I failed to do on the night we were graded, a night Tanya couldn't hold back. I couldn't lift a beer with my right hand for weeks, and every time I tried, I thought of her.
Woo!
Thank you. Weirdly, another of the people that I used to train with at that time is now the Labour candidate for Mayor of North Tyneside, which is really bizarre. It's like, at least you could beat up the other candidates, I guess. But I shouldn't be so flip about the violence of cis women. No TERFs showed up at my Conway Hall gig, but one thing I learned in Seven Sisters a few days later was that my supposed natural physical advantage as a trans woman didn't count for all that much against someone who knew what they were doing. Tap, she says, the second that you feel the lock. You will feel it tomorrow if you don't. She asks me what I like. I try to sound chill when I say that I like to take hits to my breasts and I like to be choked. She nods, and we look up, collar and elbow, each taking a knee. She chokes me, stools me, rolls me back up to my knees, tells me I need to be less stiffened, to try to fight instead of rolling with her. I say, I'm worried that I'll hurt you. She says, try. I start resisting more. I make her work, and once she even gives, but I don't even run her close. I tap when she squeezes my head till I think it'll burst. I tap when she almost breaks my floating ribs. I tap when she sits with her thighs either side of my face, so close I can feel the bristle of her hair beneath the silk. I tap when she holds her straight arms either side of my neck, and chokes, and then releases, and then chokes for even longer, looking into my eyes the whole time. And I tap when she smothers me, gives me a fraction of an inch to mine for air, then cuts me off from even that. I tap and tap and tap. Which is all well and good in a fully consensual situation, but what about the world beyond it? What if a knife welding bigot had turned up at Conway Hall? What if, like Chrissy Lee Pollis, I was sucker punched and beaten to a pulp in the bathroom of a Baltimore McDonald's? And even if I was able to defend myself from a cis woman's fists, how would I fare in the eyes of an onlooker, an authority? Melissa's roommate hit her, but the cis arresting officer thought she was the aggressor because Melissa, she was trans. And then the women at the shelter got Melissa in the shower and assaulted and ejected her because they knew she was trans. And if you're listening and thinking that my record must be skipping because I'm still listing injustices to people who are trans, then think how I feel. My reality is the conditionality of my right to exist, while you insist you've heard this script before and barely stifle yawns because I'm spoiling your enjoyment as you practice fact avoidance. But the poisonous thing is, there are Melissas in this city as we speak. And the aggressors, the arresting officers, the victims, well, they too are in this city. And you know that this is true because the kids who bullied you, yeah, they were cis. The kids who hit you in the playground, brick by brick, tore your esteem down till you wished that you could leave town, scream the shitting, pissing scheme down, they were cis. So if this seems a bit repetitive, it might be worth reflecting on just exactly where the problem is. As a feminist, how much time do you spend thinking about penises? What sort of feminist practice is it to take upskirt photos of trans women?
I spend plenty of time with mine.
Dude, shut the fuck up!
Right now. Yeah, leave it
Like,
out.
actually shut the fuck up. Sorry.
Anyway, that was going to link to a discussion about the Michigan Women's Music Festival.
Carry on, please, dear.
Attendees at that festival, who drove out trans women with cries of "man on the land," joked about raping a teenage trans girl as they queued up to spit in her face, and covered up the rape of one cis woman in the campgrounds by another, going so far as to aid the perpetrator in escaping justice. The same voices that want trans women kept out of rape counselling and battered women's shelters try as hard as they can to shout down and discredit any research into rape and intimate partner violence in queer women's relationships. I leave it up to you why people who discredit rape survivors and protect rapists might be very keen to ensure they alone have access to vulnerable women. But if you want a story about my body and its penis, here's one. Before I even accepted I was trans, I knew there were things about my body I didn't like, and it was one of them. It just didn't seem right. I hated being reminded this was what I had, this ugly cudgel of a thing. I liked orgasms, but I did everything I could to keep my attention focused away from what I used to attain them. And when I thought about having sex, all I knew was I wanted to find a way of avoiding it during that, too. So, it took me a long time to lose my virginity. Shock. When I did, I tried my best to get my partner in the act off through anything other than penile insertion. Unlike most cis boys of my age, I did not see foreplay as a necessary prelude to getting my dick wet. I saw it as a way of avoiding that altogether. The theory was this: she would come, then offer to get me off in turn, and I would decline, managing in one stunning move to acquire massive kudos as a strong and selfless lover, while at the same time avoiding the whole tricky penis and vagina bit. This was my strategy. I suppose you could call it defensive fucking. Only it didn't quite work out like that. We made out, she came, but instead of relaxing and enjoying a nice post-coital hug, she reached down and started trying to get me off. I tried to tell her I was fine, that we didn't need to, but she persisted, uselessly, as it turned out, because thanks to my nerves about the whole PIV thing, I was now feeling about as turned on as a pool noodle. She, however, seemed to view this as a challenge, and started pulling at me more violently, more aggressively, as if intent on getting me erect through sheer force of will. All the while, I was trying to tell her as calmly as I could manage that it was fine, that we could stop now, that I didn't mind if we stopped now, that I would be perfectly happy if we stopped now, that in fact, I wanted us to stop now. And then she looked up at me, said, "I want you to know I don't normally do this," and went down on me. Which is the point at which I flat out started saying no. Because if PIV was hard for me, I hated blowjobs. Something about them seemed violent and horrible, like the porn I'd sometimes seen with my male friends. Massive monster dicks that I felt no connection to at all, being shoved in and out of women's mouths. So this was too much. I told her, even as she moved her head into position, that I didn't want this. And when she started doing it, I asked her to stop. I pleaded with her to stop, and eventually I screamed at her to stop, which, thankfully, she did. And for years, whenever I told this story, it was this I would hang on to, that she stopped when I screamed. Not the first time I asked her to stop, no, admittedly, not the second time, but when I screamed, she stopped. And so that meant it couldn't be... For 13 years, whenever I told anyone about this, I would always say it couldn't be anything really serious, because at the point when I started screaming, she stopped. And for years, that's what I told myself. But the stopping is not the important part of that story at all. Sometimes I call you my rapist. And that feels wrong somehow, but I cannot keep saying the woman who raped me every time I talk about you, and cannot say your name because I only know your first name anyway. And in saying even that, I turn accuser, and I'm too aware how easily my case could be undone. An accuser who'd been drinking when it happened. An accuser who consented at the start. An accuser who at the time was presenting as male. An accuser who'd be bound to fail in court. So I, out of need for variation, name you mine. My rapist. It feels wrong, too intimate somehow, suggests collusion, a joint enterprise between us. It takes two, they say. Two, babe. Me, you. It smacks of going steady and those creepy 50s love songs. Every night I hope and pray this fear will go away, but I cannot say your name, and the woman who raped me sounds clunky, and anyway is legally someone who can't exist. English law defines rape as unlawful penetration with a penis. It's sexual assault when women do it to each other or to men, as if the two are easily distinguished. But the woman who sexually assaulted me is clunkier still than the woman the law calls impossible. So sometimes you are my rapist. And I wonder if, in some sense, this is true. Was I the only one? You seemed surprised when I said no. Was it shock that spurred you on as much as malice? Or instead of it? And do I want that? Does it make you better, or me special, if it was only the once? It doesn't matter if I'm one or one of many. I may call you my rapist, but we know that isn't true. Whatever law or rumour says, whoever else there was, you were never mine. You were the rapist I ran into. Because you drove me everywhere, including to distraction. Because we raced a storm across Westminster Bridge. Because I did my Brian Blessed voice. Because I always felt like the girl, despite the faith you said you had in the solid presence of my sleeping form. Because you wrapped a string of tinsel round a yucca plant and said that it was Christmas. Because you turned to me when all the other guests had gone and whispered, "May I kiss you," inappropriately. Because I lost myself in loving you, both of you, all of you. Because love is two people destroying each other and pretending that we aren't. Because I will say I have been a strong lover while knowing I have not. I will say I have been strong. I will say I have been strong and not believe it. I will say I have been strong and feel defeated. I will say I have been strong. I will repeat it until strength is stripped of meaning. I will say I have been strong, and we will both know I am lying. In the wreckage of the rules we wrote on cards, in your feathers, in your tar, gave in. Gone quizzling to a force I said I'd not abet again. We will know I am not strong. We will pretend.
Our bodies can tell stories. And in telling those stories, there is nothing more important than the face, the voice, the mouth that screams or snarls. Our breasts are dumb, our dicks are mute, our cunts are landscape. We symbolize drama with masks, one ecstatic, one inconsolable. I've had sex with women who have never seen my dick. My voice told them all they had to know. When I began taking hormones, I thought I would only begin to be happy when my breasts began to grow. When I underwent vaginoplasty, I prepared for it to take the longest time and many interventions. I did not realize things would change so quickly. I did not think gender euphoria could be as simple as my skin becoming softer, my body hair thinner, a lover calling me a sexy cunt, Volumnia laughing, she's scissoring me. I did not realize how little of my gender resided in my body, and how much in the space between others' bodies and my own. I did not realize how little my gender was about cunts or tits or dicks, and how much was about the emotion. When I look at what the most vocal transphobes have to say about people like me, when I see Kathy Brennan grinning beside a cardboard cutout labelled "Sorry about your dick," when I see well-remunerated newspaper columnists describe women like me as men who chop off their dicks and think they can dictate to women, when I see hacks scaremongering that young men they see only as butch lesbians are being told they must cut off their breasts, I find it instructive to see whose imagination is looking at people and whose is reducing us to cuts of meat. When I see Mumsnet posters say being a lesbian means simply being attracted to people with cunts, I wonder how their partners feel. When I see academics like Germaine Greer, Sheila Jeffreys, and their acolytes say, on the one hand, that I will never be a woman because I do not know what it's like to have a big, hairy, smelly vagina, and on the other, that even after surgery I will have only a newly carved out orifice, a fuckhole, a new microbial habitat which will cause serious smell issues, that I will have not a vagina but a gaping fistula filled with bacteria desperately trying to heal itself, I am reminded that there are many types of pornographic imaginary, and that disgust is often central to an unacknowledged fetishism. One of the most disturbing messages I've ever received was a private message on a fetish forum in which a bigoted cis-woman fantasized at length and in the most lurid, violent detail about the vaginoplasty she wrongly assumed I had already had at that point in my transition, a salacious fantasia about violence being inflicted on the space between my legs. It was a mercifully early exposure to the form, which I would encounter again and again. The writer of that message taught me how much women like her are obsessed with the dicks of trans women, the breasts of trans men, how obsessed they are with locating violence in or adjacent to our bodies, rather than as something that can begin in their bodies and be inflicted on her own, who see gender and violence as a property of bodies, rather than a conversation in the space between. When I began performing parts of this piece in front of queer audiences, when I talked about having crushes on the girls who bullied me at school, how the toughness of women can be way more attractive than just simple prettiness, how sexy it can sometimes feel to struggle, I was amazed at how many cis lesbians came up to me afterwards and told me how much they'd felt seen. It's almost as if cis people who obsess over the body parts of trans people with violent rhetoric which reduces us to those parts, licking their lips and laughing as they do so, might not be the best guides to the all-embracing multiplicity of lesbian desire. Almost as if they might be the ones who are really, truly porn-sick because they've spent so long getting off on seeing us as bits of injured meat, they can't see us as people, and can't see why anybody else would, either. It must annoy them a great deal that so many cis women accept us, love us, desire us, and are more than willing to see our bodies as equal participants in the gender conversation. That so many cis women aren't frightened of our trans bodies. Quite the opposite. That, when seeing our bodies, most cis women don't feel the need to reduce us to one facet of those bodies like a mounted moth, but embrace the space between as one of positivity and possibility, a space for telling more and better stories. I love your body's sense of being ashlar and marshmallow, your muscled fat, the ripple of your meat, your tender brawn, the size up of your squint, your attitude, your fluency in aggro. I love the way your hands can cover mine, the way you twist my arm behind my back, the talk with which your muscles wrench my neck, the way that you divinely take your time before releasing, how your sweat can shine. I love the way your eyes flash when we fight, the enormities you whisper in my ear. Dyke, bitch, shemale, faggot, tranny, queer. The way you bring my vulnerabilities to light. The capacity your thighs and concrete share of standing mute and dramatizing fear. I love your violent virtue, your brute art, the way you have me beaten from the start.